So our next presenter has identified the imperative of. Now we talk a lot in California about talk about floating offshore wind turbines, right? The LCOE of that could end up being $200-300 megawatt hour, something just crazy, right? But in the developing or lower middle income countries around the world, not only are there massive issues with access to water, not just reliable access to water, but any access at all to water, and reliable access to power. And of course, like hydropower is always something that if you have elevation, you have some precipitation at all, might be an option. So Sarah had a strong interest in focusing on a region of the world that is both limited in terms of the geophysical resources, constrained by fraught political context, and dealing with an issue of whether to build a giant dam, if you consider everything, biodiversity, possibilities of ecological impacts versus giving possibly providing power and infrastructure to millions of people who are otherwise energy poor. It is a really tough and important area of work. And Sarah's commitment to do research on this topic and to just go in depth on this really impressed me, as did her warmth and kindness throughout the program, and just being easy to talk to. And she did a really nice project here and gave it an interesting name, The Dam Problem. The controversy of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Sarah, you're up.
Hi, like Corey said, my name is Sarah Hmoud, and I'll be discussing the controversy of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. So just a brief outline of what I'll be talking about today. I'll begin with the background of an introduction of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Then I'll go into the Nile River, climate vulnerability in Egypt and Ethiopia, and then I'll continue by presenting my research questions, and then my findings and impacts, and finally my conclusions and future projections. So while dam construction is declining in most parts of the world, dam projects in Africa are on the rise to aid with economic development. The Gird is Africa's newest and largest dam, having been completed in 2023 and standing at 145 meters high and 1,780 meters long. According to Ethiopia, the dam is meant to generate power, contribute to economic development, and promote cooperation beyond borders and regional integration. As of 2022, more than half of its population lacked access to electricity, so with this dam, millions will be lifted out of poverty, and affordable electricity will be provided to more than 60 million Ethiopians, with plans to reach 100% electrification by 2025. By irrigating hundreds of thousands of acres of land, the dam is also meant to expand the country's agricultural sector and will help downstream countries better manage their reservoirs and decrease flood risks. So as you can see here, before the dam was constructed, the Nile River was pretty small, or relatively. And then after it was constructed, you can see the reservoir and the massive impacts it's had on the environment. So the Nile River flows through 11 countries and provides water to 291 million residents of its basin. Most of its waters are consumed by downstream countries of Egypt and Sudan, with Egypt being the #1 consumer, with 90% of its fresh water coming from the river and 7% of its electricity powered by hydropower. In this map, you can see the entire Nile Basin outlined in black. Climate change has caused Egypt's temperatures to rise dramatically, which has led to increased water stress, with the amount of water lost to evapotranspiration consistently surpassing the amount gained through precipitation. On top of less water availability, heat stress will mean declining productivity and disruption to Egypt's domestic food supply chains. Economic development and a growing population have only exacerbated the issue by substantially increasing demand and heightening the country's water stress. Climate change has also caused sea level rise and seawater intrusion into the Nile to begin depleting the river's freshwater supply. As you can see on this graph, drought has been the main natural hazard that has affected Ethiopians for the past 40 years. Ethiopia's substantial reliance on agriculture exposes it even more harshly to disruptions in rainfall patterns, more frequent and severe droughts, and soil degradation. These changes in climate also elevate waterborne diseases such as malaria, and the increase in dam construction is increasing this risk still further, as I will elaborate further in a later slide. So as for the questions I sought to research, they included: how does the political relationship between Egypt and Ethiopia affect the Gird controversy? What are the detrimental impacts of the Gird? And should it be deconstructed? And if so, what would the impacts mean for Ethiopia, environmentally, economically, etc.? So the controversy around the Nile's water allocation rights did not begin with the Gird, but almost a century ago now, in 1929, when Egypt made an agreement with Great Britain which granted Egypt veto rights over any construction along the Nile River. Then in 1959, they made another agreement, that is illustrated in this map, allotting Egypt 66% of the Nile's waters and Sudan 22%, but allocating none to Ethiopia. Ethiopia thus does not recognize these agreements as illegitimate and names them in a colonial-era design meant to promote Egypt's interests. Because of these past disagreements, the dam's construction may be seen as Ethiopia's method to shift power dynamics in the Nile Basin. However, the majority of the Gird's financing came directly from the Ethiopian people, and so can also be seen as a symbol of Ethiopian nationalism. To Egypt and Sudan, the dam is viewed as an existential threat since it raises concerns of water shortages and artificial droughts. Artificial droughts to two countries that rely on the river as their main source of fresh water, and especially for Egypt, whom the river also has cultural and historical significance. While Sudan has also declared a strong opposition to Gird, it has not signed on to any Egyptian-led initiatives because it could potentially benefit from the energy produced by the dam. Furthermore, Egypt's position has shifted from their initial complete opposition to a willingness to make concessions, suggesting that Gird and the Aswan High Dam work as part of a multi-reservoir operation. So now for some extra context regarding Egypt's water usage. As displayed by this graphic, Egypt is under extreme water stress, but that is partly due to the country's unsustainable mega projects, such as its new administration capital, which is being built in the middle of the desert and therefore being sent hundreds of thousands of cubic meters of the Nile's waters each day. Moreover, billions of cubic meters of water are wasted annually via food waste within the country. Desalination has been proposed as a possible remedy for this water crisis because of the country's extensive coastline, but even with Egypt's current 81 desalination plants, they only provide around 1% of the country's fresh water, not to mention the high cost and environmental footprint of waste from that process. So here are just a few images of Egypt's new administration dam currently being constructed. You can see on the bottom left a map of where it is located, which is pretty much just in the middle of the desert, not near any water sources, then the closest being the Nile River. And on the top right is Egypt's plan to build a green river that runs through this capital. And of course, because this is an artificial river, it will be getting all its water from the Nile, and it's actually meant to mimic the Nile. Okay, so now back to the impacts of the Gird. African dams cause at least 1.1 million malaria cases each year. The population at risk of malaria around these dams is estimated to be 15 million, which is projected to increase to 25 to 26 million by the 2050s. This is due to the fact that reservoirs resulting from damming rivers provides ideal breeding habitats for malaria-causing mosquitoes. Thus, as illustrated by this graph, the closer communities live to reservoirs, which is the distances of which are represented by the gray bars, the greater the risk of contracting malaria, the incidences of which are represented by the black lines. However, in water-stressed areas like sub-Saharan Africa, people tend to relocate close closer to water infrastructures, the construction of which are increasing, to more easily access water for domestic use and irrigation, which is why malaria cases in sub-Saharan Africa are on the rise. So dams not only present risks to people, but the environment as well. Though the hydropower industry brands dams as green sources of energy, truthfully, hydropower represents a false climate solution. First off, manufacturing the materials to construct dams may produce emissions if they are made using fossil fuels, which often they are. Secondly, when dams are built, greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide and methane form in the resulting reservoirs as a result of the aerobic and anaerobic decomposition of biomass in the water. Collectively, reservoirs contribute 1.3% of the world's annual greenhouse gas emissions. Additionally, dams and reservoirs fragment rivers, destroy forests, deter nutrient flows, and speed up the process of evaporation, contributing to about 170 cubic kilometers of annual evaporation. So how can these negative impacts be reversed? Well, Ethiopia and other countries harboring dams must consider the danger dams pose as they age. Even when structurally sound, large dams are considered high hazard, and so they'll usually turn to only as a last resort. Removing dams completely is an effective and proactive way to prevent loss of life and property, protect the environment and ecosystems, and negate political controversies. The Klamath River Dam removal project is an excellent example of dam demolition being a success. For about a century, 6 dams clogged the Klamath River, causing massive toxic algae blooms, which you can see in the top picture, and mass fish die-offs, with 2 whole salmon species completely disappearing, upon which the indigenous tribes of the region depended. As of the beginning of this year, 4 of the 6 dams were completely demolished, after which the environment began to recover at a rapid rate. However, dam demolition is no simple matter, particularly for countries with emerging economies like Ethiopia, where dams, irrigation systems, and hydropower play a critical role in fighting poverty. Therefore, in cases such as this, dam removal may be impractical and not a viable option. Oh, sorry. In conclusion, there is no simple solution to this incredibly complicated issue, but as I'm sure we all know, nothing is ever simple when it comes to politics. Nonetheless, some things are certain. Environmentally, hydropower dams do cause more detrimental impacts than benefits, especially in the long run. Economically, it depends not only on the country, but also the distance one is from the dam. Dam demolition is effective, but may not be the solution for this particular dam controversy. And lastly, Egypt's proposition that the Gird and Aswan High Dam work as part of a multi-reservoir operation should be looked into further as a solution to the political aspect of this issue, if not the others. For the future, I hope to conduct data analyses of the Nile River flow rates and water quality post-dam construction, both in Ethiopia and downstream in Egypt, and compare them to pre-dam levels. It would also be beneficial to determine the statistics of people benefiting from the dam versus those facing detrimental effects due to it. Comparing the Aswan High Dam to the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, as well as determining whether removal of downstream dams would be more beneficial / efficient than that of upstream dams, as done on the Klamath River, would also be useful information to definitively declare the best solution for all parties involved. Of course, I would like to thank my advisors, Tariq, Lauren, and Ian, and of course my chair, Corey. And thank you for listening.
Thank you for the interesting presentation. It's interesting put in the larger context of the history of dams. For a while, dams were the symbol of modernism and development, and it seemed like, at least in U.S. late 20th century environmentalism, they became, evil, and the dams went from a sign of development to something that was destroying the environment. But I think what your project reminds us is that for much of the world, dam development in India and the Three Gorges Dam, Narmada in India here, it's still a kind of cornerstone of development. So I was trying to, in your concluding slide, I was trying to see which way you were kind of going, if you were being diplomatic about the pros and cons, or if you really kind of in the end have a definitive opinion about dams, but you're not expressing it. I guess comparing from the beginning to the end of the project, are you more pro-dam or skeptical dam?
Well, after this researching for this project, I definitely am against dams, just in general. But I do recognize that they are very helpful for economies that are still developing and for people in remote areas that aren't able to access fresh water. So it is a bit of a difficult decision to make, but in general, I would say I am against dams. Yeah.
Thank you.